Paul Penzone, the sheriff of Maricopa County, joins us to talk about progress the agency is making and the conviction of the former sheriff. Welcome to the Mike Broomhead Show.
Well, I got a message, I got a song. Can I get a witness? Tell me what's going on. I show the people a better way.
Get to our interview with Sheriff Paul Penzone here in just a few moments, but we start every show off with something we call the sweep. Now, the sweep is sponsored by my good friends at Zero Res Carpet and Tile Cleaning. Nationally, there's been a lot going on in the news. Let's start with immigration. President Trump has a new immigration policy that they have just released. He had one of his aides, Stephen Miller, come out and talk about the release of this new policy and what it is. And it's a merit-based system. And so he gets into a confrontation with a CNN reporter that's had a lot of confrontations before. So I want you to hear the argument, and then I'll tell you what's really going on. So watch this.
I am shocked at your statement that you think that only people from Great Britain and Australia would know English. It reveals your cosmopolitan bias to a shocking degree that in your mind, no, this is an amazing moment.
So the amazing moment was this. The accusation was if one of the requirements, which it isn't a requirement, but it adds to where you are on the list, is how far up the priority list you are if you speak English when you come here, if you are self-sufficient. So the reporter said, and it's Acosta, of course, from CNN, if you do this, only people from Great Britain and from Australia are going to come to America. Well, there's a silly statement because other people speak English in the world, and it's not necessarily a requirement. My issue with any of this is the stories of immigrants come here with nothing at the prospect of a new life, and in one generation are living the American dream. I don't want to lose those. I know that President Trump wants America first, and I appreciate everything he's saying about immigration. But the fact of the matter is, if there are people that want to come here to move forward, they should have the opportunity to come here and move forward. I've told this story before many times on the radio show of meeting a Somalian who was an Ethiopian cab driver that was telling me about his journey to America. 7 years he was waiting, or 10 years he was waiting as a homeless person in Kenya before he was finally given a visa. Span of 5 years he became a citizen, brought his family here, had another child, owns a home, and just kept saying in the cab, God bless America, with tears in his eyes. That's the American dream we should never lose with any immigration policy, in my opinion. Big story of the week for me was Senator John McCain. Senator McCain back in town getting treatment and was in my studio on Wednesday. It was a great day, the first interview the senator had done since returning back to Arizona to get treatment. I can say a couple of things about the senator. He looked like his old self. He sounded like his old self. He was as funny and self-deprecating as he's ever been, and it was great to talk with the senator. But I did ask him about his votes and his no votes on the repeal. He said he ran on repeal and replace, and the first two bills repealed but didn't replace. The second bill, or the third bill out there, was called the skinny repeal. He said that didn't repeal anything, and he wasn't going to go to conference hoping they were going to get something done. So that was the reasons the senator gave me. It's up on my blog at the radio side of things if you want to hear it. It was a compelling 45-minute interview. Anthony Scaramucci out. That was a big story during the week. He didn't get much time in that job, did he? I think 250 hours is what he was in the job. And my biggest story of the week is Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She was once the chairwoman of the Democratic Party. She's still a congresswoman from the state of Florida. Her and a bunch of other Democrats had a family of people, Pakistanis, working for them in their IT department. They were all fired because they were hacking emails and stealing information. They had their credentials revoked. So Debbie Wasserman Schultz keeps this Pakistani guy, one of them, on the payroll. Everybody else was fired by the members of Congress. One guy is on the payroll until the day before he tries to flee the country and go to Pakistan. Then we find out she was going to keep paying him even when he got back. His laptop is in the hands of the federal government. I wonder what they know. I wonder what's on that laptop, and I wonder why nobody else in the media, the big three news organizations, didn't talk about it at all. Well, that's funny. We did. Sheriff Arpaio locally, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, found guilty of contempt of court in a misdemeanor case. So we've asked Sheriff Penzone to come on to talk about it because it affects his agency. He is now the new sheriff in Maricopa County. So we'll talk to Paul Penzone about that, about the progress of the agency and parts of it that are under federal control, getting out from under that federal control, and some other things that are happening in Maricopa County because it is the largest county in the state of Arizona. All that's coming up here in just a few moments. Before we get to that interview, though, let me talk to you about my good friends at Zero Res. Zero Res Carpet and Tile Cleaning during the month of August. You know, go back to school, kids are back in school, time to clean up the damage the kids have done all summer in your home. And Zero Res has your back with a great special. It's the last month this year. They will be doing their 3 rooms of carpet, Zero Resified, for $119. It's a great deal. The product's called Empowered Water, no soaps, no chemicals, but it cleans as effectively. Carpets dry faster, they stay cleaner longer. Over 25,000 positive reviews online. Check out the good people at Zero Res. We're back in just a moment with Paul Penzone. Don't go away. The biggest county in Arizona is Maricopa County, and the sheriff is Paul Penzone. And welcome back to the show, Sheriff. It's always good to have you on.
I'm always honored to be here, Mike. It's good to see you.
So you've been in the job for a while now, kind of getting your legs under you. Before I ask you some of the specific questions, how are things going in the sheriff's office? Are they going as quickly as you wanted them to? What's happening?
I think we're making good progress. And, you know, I think most of the states, too, where people stop calling me the new sheriff. They just call me the sheriff, which is nice. But you're seeing it with the men and women, that adapting to new leadership, to focus that is really more about the X's and O's of fighting crime on the streets and running detention centers the right way is coming together. The talent was all there, and they've done a great job for a long time, but you see kind of that culture coming together now, and I feel good about where we are.
So the team of people in place, one of the things we talked about was the diversity of what you cover. I mean, everything from the most rural parts of the desert in Arizona, where sometimes you're rescuing people in the desert, to other parts, sometimes you're in, obviously, the urban areas too. What's that like to tackle? Do you keep people in specific areas because they're better in that area, or do you rotate them so they get a taste of everything?
It's actually a mixture of the two, because what you like to see is someone become so well versed in their job that you know they're effective and efficient. They know their business. But in order for others, you have to have that continuity. You have to also have that concession plan where you're looking towards the next generation. So oftentimes we'll take somebody that's really talented like that and move them somewhere else where they can bring their skill set and improve another aspect of the organization, and then give someone who's newer the chance to learn and develop. Because this organization will carry on long after I'm gone and others, so we have to constantly feed that next level of supervision, of experience, everyone else, so the organization always stays healthy.
You were making some changes along the way as you've gone through. One of the changes was dismantling of Tent City. How's that going? How far along in the process are you? Are you done? And if not, when will you be?
We're not done. The only stage that's left is those that were in work furlough. And the reason that they're a challenge is because that population, you have to keep them together because they come and go from the jail almost every day to get released to go do their work duties and then come back in. So you can't separate them throughout the jail system. It's too complicated logistically. Well, there are certain elements that are outside of my control, such as getting permits and making some construction build out to our existing facilities so that we can place all those work furlough people into one location. So right now, that's all we're waiting for. And the build out won't take long, but some of the permits and other things take a little bit of time. But we're still on course, and I expect that we'll have that completed in the next, say 3 to 5 months, and everyone moved inside. Otherwise, everything's been seamless.
Funny, of the things, the changes that were made, that seems to be the most controversial to some people because, first of all, it's the one thing that people see that is visual. I mean, you can see Tent City and see the people there, but they also said there was a lot of the inmates that were okay with the way it was before. How has it been received from inside the jail? Are the inmates happy that it's gone away? Are they happy to be back inside the building, or do they like it out in the tents?
No, there are quite a few that preferred having that freedom of movement, being outside, but jail is jail. And jail is meant to be a restrictive, confining environment because of the actions that you committed, and they adapt and they understand that now, incarceration is a little bit different than they had it before. There are those that said, well, it's too hot outside, and others that said, well, they have too much freedom. All those arguments, those are factors, but they're small factors. For me, what do we have as a jail facility? What do we need to do to run it efficiently? How can I make it safer for my detention officers? And how do we better control that population? All those boxes were checked, and now we're just making it happen. One
of the things I've discussed with police chiefs in the cities around Arizona, around the valley, is staffing. And Phoenix PD, PLE came out with a a statement of how vastly understaffed they are. Where are you with staffing on the sheriff's office? Are you short on deputies? Are you? What's the staffing level like with you?
Our greater shortage is actually on the detention side. We're short about 200 detention officers. That's our bigger part of the organization, and that's considerable when you think about the job that they do and how difficult it can be. On the enforcement side, our staffing is not that far below what our max numbers are, but our max numbers do, in my opinion, need to be reevaluated, because this is one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing county in the nation. And you have to make sure that the size and capacity of your organization matches the needs of the population. So as that population grows, we could look at it and say, hey, we want 750 deputies to cover this ground. We may be close to that number, but the problem is the number is probably off from where we are as a county right now. So we'll revisit that in the next year, and I'll talk with the Board of Supervisors about having a plan for growth and expansion of the organization to meet the needs of those we serve.
And it's it's a big county. It's a vast county, which has got to make it tougher as well to get back up to where people need to be and to cover that much area.
There's so many unique things. We have search and rescue, we have the lakes, we have all these unique responsibilities where not only do you need a greater expertise in areas that are outside of traditional law enforcement, but the demands, because this time of year in the summer, we've seen, unfortunately, a handful of deaths out at the lakes and the rivers of drownings. We've seen rescues off of the mountains and things of that nature. So the demand on our men and women grows considerably, and we can talk about getting them overtime to cover those needs, but ultimately it comes at a greater cost for the taxpayers. It also comes at a cost for the well-being and the health of our employees, because they get drained, having to work the longer hours and more days.
Well, I know that there's been some changes that were made. When you came into the sheriff's office, you were being monitored and are being monitored by the federal government. I get an update on that, and then the national news story of the conviction of the former sheriff. I just want to get your opinion on a couple of these things. So if you can stick around for one more segment, we're going to do that. We're with Sheriff Paul Penzone. He's sheriff of Maricopa County, and we're going to talk more about law enforcement in a general sense, but then some specific questions about what's happening in Maricopa County. We'll be back. Joining me is Sheriff Paul Penzone from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. And let's start with the criminal conviction of the former sheriff, Joe Arpaio. No secret that I have known the sheriff for a long time, and I'm sorry that that's kind of the last thing that's happened in his career in law enforcement for all those years. From where you stand, the perspective of a law enforcement officer, not just a replacement for him in the office, what did you think of this?
It's always a sad day when the actions of someone in law enforcement reflect poorly on the industry itself, on the profession. Because what do? We look at men and women in uniform, whether it's soldiers or those that are in firefighters, police officers. We have an expectation of the ethical baseline in their actions and everything. So when one behaves in a manner outside those lines, it reflects on all the others. Now, when it comes to the sheriff, there are a lot of folks like yourself. I know you had a good relationship that we're very fond of him personally, and I respect that, and I always understand that. But we should never allow, no matter how fond we are or how much we may dislike someone, it should never affect our opinion relative to actions. And if your actions are inappropriate, then we should be held accountable. And in this case, I do believe that the courts acted appropriately.
So it's the tough thing for me was the rock and the hard place that I saw the sheriff in with immigration enforcement. But I've taken some heat on the radio show in saying that for all the years that he said he's enforcing the laws, if you don't like the laws, change them. But when a judge gives you a lawful order, you have to obey it. And the example I used was parents in a custody battle. If one parent makes an accusation that's false, it's a false accusation. But in the interest of the child, a judge says, until we resolve this, no unmonitored visits with your kids. If you go and take your kids because you know you've done nothing wrong, you still disobeyed that order. And that doesn't make you morally wrong because you didn't do anything to begin with. The analogy I'm using there is when you get a lawful order from a judge, you have to obey it.
You're spot on. Listen, if you know what the rules are and you choose to violate those rules, then there is no excuse for it. And when we are empowered to be those that enforce the law, we have to have the greatest level of respect for it. So good intentions, morals, all of the factors are non-factors when it comes to this is the rule, this is the law, and if you don't respect the courts, you shouldn't have the power to hold others accountable and send them to that same court system. And again, I'm not sitting here passing judgment on him as a man or the history of his profession, but this particular action, what occurred, there's a price to pay. You have to be held accountable, and I think that process has taken its place.
And I think the judges, the federal judges that were disobeyed, it's a symbolic. You can't disobey a judge, and no matter who you are. And I think it's a symbolic verdict in that sense. And I'm wondering about, I mean, sentencing is going to be in October, and that to me, I'm just hoping that it just goes away after that. And that's just because I have, a personal relationship with the former sheriff. But what it has done, because of those actions, the federal government has been overseeing pieces of your organization. And you've got to meet quite a few benchmarks in order for you to take full control back over the agency. How is that going, and are you getting closer to that happening?
We are, and I'll tell you, I went here willingly. Everyone knows that, so I'm not going to complain or make excuses. But at the end of the day, I'll tell you, Mike, it's like, a bunch of folks go out to dinner and run the bill up and eat all kinds of good food and have drinks and everything, and then get up and walk away from the table, and then you show up and you got to pay the bill. I'm, along with the men and women in the organization, we're paying the bill for what occurred before, and it's an expensive bill. The monetary fees alone are about $5 million annually. That's baseline, not including other things. We saw just recently, we had a hearing, and it was the first hearing where the report itself took place during the time frame from which I have been sheriff. So even though I've been sheriff for 7 months now, this is the first full quarter under my venue, because it's always the reports lag a little bit. And we saw the greatest growths in compliance, at least to my knowledge, of anything that preceded it. We had, in most all categories, there's 2 orders, saw considerable growth, some places smaller growth, but everything is moving in the right direction. We still have a lot of work to do.
So how do you anticipate how long it's going to be before you will have control again of the agency fully?
I don't, because I think that it's setting myself up for failure. There's too many things outside of my control and that of the men and women of the organization. But we do something that was not going on before, which is stay in regular communication and contact with the Department of Justice, with the ACLU, with all those that are engaged, because we have to have a relationship. We have to be willing to have conversations to overcome this, because we must all agree on one thing. This organization will be healthy when we are doing it the right way, when we've met all those expectations, but we are free of the court orders because we are trustworthy and have proven our value. And to do that, we have to have a relationship, and we have committed to that, and we work every day, and we don't agree on everything. Sometimes we agree to disagree, but we're definitely committed to the same outcome.
Does it bother you in a sense that the immigration stuff is a little bit out of your control? I mean, your agency works with every other federal agency, the DEA, ATF, FBI, in investigations and arrests all the time, fugitives with U.S. Marshals. The one area that you're not involved at all is allowed to do is immigration stuff. Does that bother you at all, that's one area that you don't work with federal agencies on?
No, because it's a misnomer. And the misnomer is this. My predecessor did allow ICE in the jails. And we've taken that a step further because of the issue that occurred with the courtesy holds, where those were a violation of the amendment. We've given them space on the back end of the jail. So since we've created this new facilitation of their responsibilities, to my knowledge, there hasn't been anybody coming through the door and leaving on the backside that ICE wanted to take custody of that did not have the opportunity to do so. So the truth is, our jail is the busiest in the state. And all those inmates that come through there, ICE has a chance to, right in a safe environment, take custody of them and then act as they deem appropriate. So they're doing their job, and we're freed up to do our job because we have a lot of responsibilities.
I agree.
We had the firebomber the other day, all these different investigations, and if we assume this responsibility of being immigration enforcement, which would be a violation of the court order, then we're detracting from our other responsibilities where we need to dedicate our time.
All right, well, it's always good to talk with you. It's a pleasure to have you back in studio, and hopefully we'll get this as it progresses, and finally you'll have full control of the agency.
Thanks. You, my friend.
Sheriff Penzone. It's time for one of my favorite parts of the show. We call it From Arizona for America. It's our way to congratulate and thank the fine Arizona men and women who have recently graduated from boot camp and are now serving in our country's military. So please join me in honoring Airman Megan Porter from Arizona Charter Academy in Surprise, Airman Bradley Stubbe from Valley Vista High School in Surprise, and Airman Sarah Githens from Hamilton High School in Chandler. For a list of more of our friends and neighbors that are from Arizona for America, you can go to the Mike Broomhead page at aztv.com. We'll be back in a minute with Broomhead's Best and hashtag this. Don't go away. Man, I love this part of the show. I call it Broomhead's Best. This week, football returns. The Cardinals in their first preseason game, the Hall of Fame game. They're going to play football, but best of all, Kurt Warner inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Couldn't happen to a better man, and it couldn't happen to a greater Cardinal player. The guy played with heart. He was a great athlete. He's got a phenomenal story. He's a benevolent human being and a philanthropist now. Congratulations, Kurt Warner. You're this week's Broomhead's Best. Now it's time for hashtag this. Hashtag Nacho Governor. Let's go to the other side of sports. Governor Chris Christie at a baseball game, Cubs versus the Brewers. He's got a brother or son or someone that works for the Brewers. And he confronts a heckler and gets in his face. But the best part about it was he was cradling a thing of nachos like it was a newborn baby. There you go, Chris Christie. You've made the news once again. We'll be back in just a minute to close out the show. Don't go away. I mentioned at the top of the show my interview this week with Senator John McCain, and I've realized over the last few weeks since the diagnosis of his cancer that it kind of hit me hard emotionally, personally. He has been good to me. And then for him to choose my show to be the first interview he's done since his diagnosis and beginning of treatment meant a lot to me personally. But aside from that, the business of Arizona still needs to be done. And I understand the disagreement on political things. I always appreciated the senator coming on and talking to me candidly about why he did what he's done. And it's interesting to hear his perspective on things. He came in the studio, he looked great, he sounded great, and it was nice to see what I now consider to be a friend because I hadn't seen him, so I didn't know what condition he was in. And for the people of Arizona, whether you agree with him politically or you don't agree with him politically, this is a tough man. He's undergoing chemotherapy or radiation therapy, and he is still working. He went straight from therapy to my show and then straight to the office. So he's still doing his job. I'm glad to see it. I want to see if we can put away the political hatred sometimes and just recognize the human being because he is a very strong, tough human being that's led one crazy life. So I'm lucky to know him, in my opinion. I'm glad to call him my friend, and I'm glad that he's feeling better. We'll be back next week with another show, and a special thank you to Sheriff Penzone. Have a great weekend, everyone. God bless.
Get more of Mike Broomhead on Facebook, Twitter, and of course weekday mornings from 6 to 10 on News Talk 550 KFYI.